The moment that will haunt their shareholders forever came wrapped in foie gras and fake smiles. You ever watch a room go from ovation to autopsy in under 10 seconds? Because I did. Standing there, under the soft glow chandeliers of the Westcott Ballroom, Dana held a crystal obelisk engraved with her name and the words $640M Savior. Champagne was still fizzing in her flute. The CEO, slicked back hair, bone-white veneers, sole leased to quarterly earnings, walked up, clapping too hard, too loud. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, stealing the mic like he was Can-I at the VMAs, "we're entering a bold new era." Dana smiled politely. She'd rehearsed a thank you, something humble, something about the long hours and the team. She never got to say it. "In light of our strategic evolution," the CEO continued, "we're restructuring leadership. And while we honor Dana's incredible contributions, role has officially been sunset, effective immediately. Silence, not the respectful kind. The stunned, rubbernecking, did he just fire her on stage kind. A few gasps. One guy actually dropped his fork. Dana blinked once, lips still curled upward, a ghost of her thank you smile hanging like fog over her face. "Thank you for your service," the CEO added, already pivoting to the next slide on the screen behind them, some meaningless bar graph labeled Future Vision. Dana didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even look surprised. She raised her glass like a toast, nodded, and stepped off the stage with that same plastic grace reserved for open casket funerals and annual reviews. You don't forget a moment like that. Especially when it's live-streamed to investors. Especially when the woman they just humiliated holds the keys to their digital spine. Here's where I pause the funeral dirge for 1 second to say this. If you're still reading and want to see how this little corporate exorcism unfolds, hit subscribe. I'm gunning for my first 10K followers, and every click makes the revenge taste just a little sweeter. Dana didn't drive home that night. She walked 3 blocks in stilettos she hated, a ward clutched like a paperweight. Her car was still in the lot, but her head was somewhere else, looping over the last 6 months like corrupted footage. It hadn't come from nowhere, the ghosting in meetings, the maybe next quarter when she asked for resources, the intern mysteriously gaining access to her sandbox without her say-so. She knew what it meant when her commits started getting flagged for compliance review. They didn't want her expertise. They wanted her scaffolding, her name, and then her absence. She'd stayed. Out of hope? Loyalty? No, because Dana wasn't naive. She was calculating. Back at her condo, she dropped the award on the kitchen counter. It cracked the granite. She didn't flinch. Her cat rubbed against her ankle, meowed like it wanted to file a grievance. She opened her laptop, checked the license ping logs. 7 heartbeats, still active, still pointing to her private repo. The one that sat like a valve in the center of their enterprise pipeline. Invisible, untouched, and completely legally hers. It fired her mid-bite. But they forgot what she'd built, the beating heart of their infrastructure, piped through a framework they never truly owned. Dana didn't touch a single key that night, didn't need to. She just watched the cursor blink, like a pulse, like a promise. The marginalization started like mold in drywall, quiet, creeping, easy to dismiss if you didn't look too close. At first, it was just one meeting she didn't get invited to, the kind where you tell yourself it was probably a scheduling oversight. Then it became 2. Then the calendar stopped syncing her at all. When she asked the new chief innovation officer, a man with the charisma of a TED talk and the brain of a browser plugin, why she was missing from the roadmap calls, he replied with a smile that could curdle milk. "We figured your plate was full with the technical weeds. Big picture stuff needs a different altitude. Translation, stay in the basement while we steal your roof tiles." Dana watched as her interface notes got handed off to a junior dev who thought redundancy was just a typo. Budget requests she submitted came back pending for 6 weeks straight, until someone else, someone newer, made the same request and got approved within the hour. But the kicker, they still leaned on her to finish everything mission critical. Always in a crunch, always urgent, always her name listed last on the credits, if at all. She was the system's silent architect, respected just enough to be indispensable, but never visible enough to be irreplaceable. So she adapted. Dana started coding like a woman bracing for a storm. She wrapped her core modules in licensing wrappers, subtle, legal, signed, and timestamped. She used open-source dependencies she had copyright control over, buried them under layers of integration logic no one bothered to understand because she understood it, and that was enough for them. Until it wasn't. Every script that passed through her fingertips had echoes of her name somewhere. Not in the obvious header comments, those could be stripped. But deep inside, the heartbeat of a service, the handshake protocols, the unique serialization schemas, they pulsed with Dana's fingerprint. She documented everything in her own repo, not on their bloated Confluence pages where edits vanished like interns before tax season. She even wrote an internal SDK just for consistency, she'd said in meetings, and made sure the entire enterprise mesh now routed through it like arteries to a heart. That SDK lived on a license server, her license server. They never asked who hosted it. She never told. It wasn't a weapon. Not then. She didn't build it with revenge in mind. She built it like a woman who's been told one too many times that trust is earned by people who couldn't debug a toaster. She built it like someone who knew she'd be thanked for her service the minute her usefulness peaked. And quietly, Dana built a backdoor. Not a cartoon villain switchboard with flashing lights and countdown timers. Just a simple, elegant mechanism. If the license verification ping failed to validate with her key, the SDK would default to a null response. Not an error, not a shutdown, just silence. The kind of silence that makes systems wait forever. She tested it once. Alone. One Saturday, while the rest of the company was off doing mindfulness retreats and leadership escape rooms, Dana ran the simulation in a containerized environment. Ping failed. 10 seconds later, dashboards froze. APIs timed out. Data sync stalled. No alerts fired. Just gravity lost its pull. She flipped the key back on. Everything resumed like nothing had happened. It scared her, not because it broke things, because it worked too well. She filed the tool away, buried the access logs under a layer of innocuous firewall rules, wrote herself a warning note she encrypted and locked with a passphrase only her late father would have guessed, something about the make and model of the lawnmower he let her dismantle as a kid. And then she went back to work, head down, code tight, smiling just enough in meetings to make them forget how sharp her memory was. She never meant to pull the ripcord. But now that they'd set the plane on fire mid-flight and tossed her out without a parachute, well, the ripcord's looking real tempting. Dana stirred her coffee with the same stainless steel spoon she'd used every morning for a decade, absent-minded, rhythmic, like muscle memory from a life that no longer technically existed. She hadn't slept, not in the emotional collapse way, more like in the engineer awaiting a system check kind of way. Her brain had stayed lit, spinning like a server room after a thunderstorm. She didn't do anything, not actively. She just didn't interfere. At exactly 7:13 a.m., her phone buzzed. Ping, incident, license handshake failed. System retry exceeded threshold. She took a slow sip. At 7:17 a.m., another. Ping, alert, downstream API latency exceeded SLA. By 7:22, they were stacking like dominoes in a freefall. Auth fail service blocked core timeout null schema heartbeat unknown some engineer, probably the kid with the crypto beard and agile tattoo on his forearm, would be panicking right about now, running a ping tracer like a rat in a maze. Call it a hiccup, maybe a minor regression event. They always did at first. Dana's inbox remained untouched. Her Slack account had been deactivated before dessert was served last night, but the logs didn't care who had access. The logs just told the truth. And right now, the truth was, nothing was working. Across the river, inside the glass and steel cathedral of the company's HQ, the first Tier 1 support team was getting calls from internal managers, external partners, then clients. One of them, probably the European logistics firm they'd just onboarded under the $640M contract, was reporting total sync failure with their warehouse API. Orders weren't going through. Inventory tallies were off, shipments stuck. Still, the C-suite wasn't panicking. Not yet. Outages happened. Systems burped. Load balancers misfired. It's tech. You reboot, you scapegoat some legacy cron job. Throw in a patch and call it Tuesday. But this wasn't a hiccup. By 8:15, the real pain kicked in. Backend processes that hadn't received updated tokens began dropping entirely. Password resets failed. Auth middleware buckled. The status page, maintained by a third-party vendor, still claimed all systems operational because it couldn't pull the latest logs. At 8:47, Dana's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an alert, just a text, a number she hadn't saved, but one she recognized anyway. Did you do this? She stared at it. No punctuation, no signature, just 6 words and a question mark that wasn't there. That omission said everything: fear, awe, respect. Maybe all 3. She set the phone down without answering. There's a unique kind of chaos that only exists when no one knows who's in control, or if anyone still is. By 9:22, panic had reached the executive floor. CTO, a man who once bragged about refactoring entire systems over a weekend, was now screaming into a headset while trying to trace module dependencies on a touchscreen whiteboard he barely understood. Someone probably asked, "What's failing?" Someone else answered, "Everything." Dana flipped through a paperback, some trashy legal thriller she'd bought at an airport 3 years ago and never opened. The irony wasn't lost on her. Meanwhile, in conference room 5B, DevOps lead had just muttered the words that would become legend in the company's post-mortem report. Why are half the core services still pointing to an external license node? Who even approved this architecture? The silence that followed could have cracked windows. They were seeing her footprints now. Too late. This wasn't destruction. Not yet. It was erosion. The kind that starts beneath your feet. And by the time you realize what's shifting, the collapse is already in motion. Codebase had always been considered stable, a word executives loved to use when they meant untouched, since the last guy quit. Now, under the panicked floodlights of a full-blown outage, that stability looked more like rot covered in duct tape and positive slide decks. It started with a junior engineer, some poor soul working on 2 hours of sleep and a half-eaten breakfast burrito, digging through old commit logs to trace the SDK errors. Wasn't even looking for Dana. But there she was, tagged in comments from 18 months ago, then 12, then 6, commit after commit, referencing utilities she'd authored, modules she'd optimized, patches she'd written, because no one else could decipher the spaghetti mess left behind by their now chief innovation officer. And then came the name. Not in the comment headers or function calls. Dana was too smart for that. But embedded inside serialized objects, it left identifiers, hashes, nested keys, field tags labeled with little inside jokes only her original team would catch, like Cleopatrasync or Naughty Kenbro v2. One field simply read D-Ghost flag, triggering a round of nervous laughter that turned to a cold silence as realization set in. She hadn't left fingerprints. She'd left a ghost, spectral thread woven so deep into the framework that even the CTO couldn't tell where the company ended and Dana began. By 10:30 a.m., the engineers stopped pretending it was a routing issue. The real kicker came when they finally traced the license verification point to an IP block that resolved to an external server, registered under a Delaware LLC nobody recognized. The whois data was redacted. The domain was clean, professional. No trail. CTO, sweating through a performance fabric shirt he wore like armor, asked the one question no one wanted to answer. Who owns the license server? A pause. A longer pause. Then, we assumed it was internal. Assumed. Like children assuming the stove's cold because it looks off. They tried pinging the server. Dead. Tried bypassing the verification call. Failed. Tried spoofing the validation token. Crashed a test environment. Tried rerouting the SDK logic. Locked up 3 more services. Dana hadn't built a wall, they could climb a wall. She'd built gravity, and now it was gone. The CTO made a call to legal, then to compliance, then to the CFO. Words like exposure and intellectual property started bouncing around the boardroom like loose nails in a blender. Someone pulled up Dana's employee file. Another person started scanning her exit paperwork. No one could find a clause indicating she'd transferred ownership of her licensing framework, because she hadn't. They'd used her work like it was company property. But she'd filed it, protected it, siloed it under her own operating terms. The documents had been there all along in her private storage repo, linked in emails they'd archived and never read, signed under that blanket of plausible deniability that let execs sleep soundly while their infrastructure leaned on scaffolding no one else could hold. From her condo, Dana watched the chaos roll in like a fog bank. Stock tickers wobbling, tweets from minor dev influencers speculating about a multi-client sync outage, even a Reddit thread with the caption, "Is Enterprise Co. going under? Their backbone just evaporated." And through it all, Dana said nothing, didn't respond to the text, didn't call anyone, didn't post cryptic memes or quotes about karma or power moves. No subtweets, no anonymous leaks. She wasn't some Bond villain with a lair and a monologue. She was silence. And silence was terrifying. Somewhere in the mess, a project lead finally whispered the thing everyone else was too scared to say aloud. What if she didn't break anything? They stared. What if she just took her stuff back? That landed like a gunshot. Because if that was true, then it wasn't sabotage. It was sovereignty, and they had nothing. The first official statement hit the wire at 11:42 a.m. A lifeless press release written by some poor comms director who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and hadn't yet realized he was already updating his resume in his head. Enterprise Co. is experiencing a temporary disruption due to legacy technical debt in its middleware infrastructure. We are actively investigating and expect a full resolution shortly. Our clients remain our top priority. Legacy, technical, debt, like Dana's code was some forgotten relic from the floppy disk era. Like the foundation they begged her to build while slashing her influence was suddenly ancient history they had nothing to do with. A neat little lie for shareholders and media to swallow, while the internal organs of the company liquefied in real time. Lies have a half-life, and before the PR team could crank out another round of everything is fine slide decks, the cracks began to spread inward. Internal Slack logs leaked, screenshots of panicked threads, managers screaming at engineers screaming back. One screenshot, dated from 2 months prior, showed a thread where Dana had raised a concern about improper key storage. The response: a shrug emoji and a reply from the CTO, not a priority. Move fast, the subreddit exploded. Meanwhile, anonymous emails began dripping into reporters' inboxes, not from Dana, she was still off the grid, but from people who remembered. Former teammates, mid-level engineers. One thread was titled, "They used her." Then they buried her. Attached were screenshots of request rejections, Slack messages labeling her a bottleneck, calendar audits showing meeting after meeting she was explicitly removed from, while still being named the primary on every core system's deliverable. Someone had even found a PDF, an archived request Dana had filed, asking for legal clarification on the licensing status of her framework. Dated 14 months ago. Denied. No reason given. The quiet rage started brewing outside the building. By 1:06 p.m., 2 minor investors had issued public statements seeking clarity. By 1:30, a mid-sized VC firm that had poured $80 million into the last round filed an emergency request for a shareholder call. And by 2:00 p.m., the news anchor on a financial cable channel asked the question that would become the guillotine's lever. How do you fire the architect of a $640 million deal? And then lose access to the infrastructure she built? Wasn't just a tech failure anymore. It was theater, and Dana was the ghost protagonist in every whispered script. Inside Enterprise Co., the factions turned cannibal. Marketing blamed product blamed engineering blamed legal blamed procurement for not enforcing proper IP transfer protocols. And somewhere in a soundproof boardroom, the CEO, whose brilliant idea it had been to sunset Dana live on stage for optics, was now Googling phrases like whistleblower retaliation and breach of fiduciary duty. HR pretended not to exist. Compliance ran for cover. The only person with answers, gone and not talking. Clients started asking questions too, not just about when things would be restored, but about how deep the instability really ran. Dana had built more than modules. She built trust, architecture with integrity. And now, all that remained was a black box blinking red and an executive team choking on their own hubris. One VP tried to rally the troops with a rousing all-hands email titled "The Power of Resilience." The email bounced for 113 employees. The user directory was still broken. Dana didn't leak anything, but she didn't stop anyone else from telling the truth either. And truth, once whispered, doesn't go back in the box. By sundown, narrative war had tilted. She wasn't the villain. She was the exiled prophet, and the temple was already burning. The emergency board meeting was supposed to be private, but when panic becomes policy, nothing stays sealed for long. They convened in the 9th floor executive suite, blinds drawn, air thick with decaf and desperation. Most of them flew in that morning. One board member still had travel socks on, room buzzed with clipped sentences, and expensive watches being checked too often. No one made eye contact with the CEO, not since that CNBC clip from an hour earlier, where his attempt to reassure markets looked like a hostage video filmed mid-nervous breakdown. "Start from the beginning," barked the chairwoman, her tone sharp enough to peel paint. The CTO cleared his throat and launched into a sanitized version of hell. Explained the SDK dependencies, the failed license handshake, the now inert infrastructure strangling their operations like a python in slow motion. "Why can't we just flip it back on?" someone asked. "Because," the CTO muttered, "we don't own it." A pause. The kind of pause that swallows years of fake confidence and late-night pitch decks. "What do you mean we don't own it?" He slid a printed document across the table. This clause, her original employment contract, amended after the 2017 reorganization. It defines anything she developed outside working hours, using her own resources, and not explicitly commissioned in writing, as her property unless otherwise agreed in writing. Which, to be clear, it wasn't. The chairwoman read it twice. One board member audibly swore. Another closed his laptop like it had insulted him. "So, she built it. We used it. We fired her. Now we can't access it." "Correct. And she didn't sabotage anything?" "Technically no, she just revoked passive access by not renewing the license ping." The silence was louder than screaming. Legal was already 3 floors down, assembling a crisis response war room. Every outside counsel on retainer had been activated, like DEFCON attorneys. Compliance officers reviewed every communication with Dana over the past 2 years, trying to figure out if anyone violated whistleblower protections, IP clauses, or federal labor retaliation codes. One junior compliance analyst found an internal Slack thread where a VP joked about getting Dana out before she pulls an Edward Snowden. That line alone could cost them millions in court. Whispers started bubbling. Not just about legal exposure, but about ethics violations. If Dana had filed a concern and it was buried, if she had raised flags and was punished for it, this wasn't just a systems crash anymore. It was corporate misconduct. At 4:02 p.m., Dana sat on her sofa, sipping ginger tea and watching muted coverage of her former company's stock sliding across a red ticker. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She looked like someone waiting for a train she'd scheduled herself. She picked up her phone, scrolled, found the number. It belonged to Marcy Devlin, contracts attorney she used to consult with back when they were both clawing their way through a tech company acquisition in 2015. Dana hadn't spoken to her in years. But the woman was smart, sharp, and most importantly, discreet. She typed just 5 words, "I'm ready to talk on my terms." 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Let's meet. You name the place." Across town, the CEO sat in front of a dry erase board filled with half-erased timelines and red scribbles. One word had been circled 3 times: exposure. He didn't know what Dana would do next, but the board was no longer asking if he'd survive this. They were asking how much longer they had to pretend he was still in charge. The headline dropped at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time, timestamp that now lives in infamy on every whiteboard inside Enterprise Co.'s ruined PR bunker. Exclusive: whistleblower architect retained legal control over Enterprise Co.'s core infrastructure, fired without transfer of rights. Subhead: internal documents reveal IP ownership never transferred to company. Collapse tied to revoked access, not internal failure. It came from one of the top tech investigative journalists, someone with Pulitzer rumors circling their name like vultures on thermals. The article was crisp, surgical, and devastating. It included annotated screenshots of Dana's licensing agreements, excerpts from board meeting minutes where her contract was misrepresented, and quotes from 2 former compliance officers now requesting whistleblower protection. And near the bottom, a phrase that would be picked up by anchors, podcasters, bloggers, teenagers with TikTok microphones. This wasn't sabotage. This was theft, disguised as restructuring. By 8:03 a.m., #Dana Knows and #IP Matters were trending on X and LinkedIn simultaneously, an unholy convergence of memes and legal commentary. An old photo of Dana, smiling modestly at a 2019 trade show, was now being turned into digital oil paintings, reaction gifs, even a mock saint candle sold by an Etsy seller under the tagline, "Patron Saint of Boundary Clauses." People didn't just sympathize with her, they understood her. She hadn't burned the house down. She'd simply turned off the lights and left them to trip over the furniture they never learned to arrange without her. Inside the company, the panic mutated into full-body paralysis. The board issued a formal statement calling the situation deeply regrettable. The CEO, just days earlier, had mocked Dana's contributions in a leaked Slack message. "Anyone can code, she just gatekeeps syntax," went dark. His personal assistant confirmed he'd left the building. No one saw him again that day. Investor calls jammed the lines. A third of the shareholder base demanded an emergency vote to restructure the executive suite. Two firms dumped their entire position in one move. The stock opened 12% down and tumbled like a greased bowling ball. By close of market, Enterprise Co. had shed 38% of its value, not from a cyber attack, not from fraud, just from reality catching up. Clients weren't far behind. Major ones, enterprise logistics platforms, financial reconciliation engines, even a hospital chain, began reaching out to competitors. Internally, someone leaked a spreadsheet showing active clients by risk rating. 4 of the top 10 had already initiated exit procedures. One CSM wrote a desperate mass email titled "How Can We Rebuild Trust?", which was immediately leaked and ratioed into oblivion with the reply, "Step 1, don't fire your infrastructure architect during dessert." Meanwhile, Dana stayed quiet. Still no press conference. No social media posts. Her legal counsel, Marcy, issued a single line to the Times. "Miss Randall has not taken any destructive action. She has simply exercised her contractual rights." The word grace got thrown around a lot. So did genius, even revenant. Because Dana didn't gloat. She didn't try to sue them back into dust. She just let them implode under the weight of their own ignorance, while keeping her dignity so intact it looked like armor. By the end of the day, one major client sent her an encrypted email through back channels. Just a single line: "If you're rebuilding, we're listening." The final blow didn't come with fireworks or lawsuits or a mic drop at a press conference. It came in the form of a press release, short, clinical, devastating in its elegance. Dana Randall Technologies has signed a long-term licensing agreement with Axis Bridge Global, ensuring operational continuity for their multi-region B2B logistics framework. Terms undisclosed. Axis Bridge was Enterprise Co.'s biggest client, the $640 million jewel in their crown, the reason Dana had been on that banquet stage in the first place. And now, she wasn't just in their infrastructure. She was their infrastructure, signed under a new Delaware entity with airtight IP clauses. Staffed by just 6 people, 5 engineers and Marcy. Operating lean, quiet, efficient. They didn't even have a public-facing website, just a single-page portal with a login prompt and a footer that read, "We build what you can't afford to lose." The reaction was nuclear. Within hours, 3 more clients reached out, not with threats but with offers. NDA-bound, loyalty-fractured offers. Dana didn't chase a single one. She didn't have to. Reputation moved faster than marketing ever could. Hers was now folklore. Meanwhile, Enterprise Co. bled out in full view. The CEO, after 2 more days of public flailing, resigned. The board let him write a fake smile goodbye email filled with phrases like "deeply proud," "strategic challenges," and "time to refocus on family." No one replied, not even HR. The internal memo leaked before he hit send. The interim CEO, formerly the CFO, tried to pivot. New messaging, new collaboration culture, new buzzwords. But no one was buying. The engineers were demoralized. Legal was preparing for a class action suit from employees who realized their bonuses were tied to ghost valuations. And the remaining clients, leaving in quiet waves. In the same boardroom where they once toasted Dana's success with Prosecco and polished speeches, they now argued over who authorized what, who read which clause, who ignored which warning. No one had answers. No one had a plan, because the plan had always been Dana. They just didn't realize it until she was gone. Dana, for her part, never raised her voice, never made a scene. She never tweeted a single snide remark, never granted a revenge interview, never even gave a quote. But her presence was everywhere, ghosting inside systems, behind client pivots, in compliance audits now citing non-transferable architecture as a cautionary tale. It became a case study, a business school lecture, a caution and a blueprint. At night, she'd sit on her balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city she once powered flicker through the trees. Her inbox chimed softly, new contracts, invites, congratulations from people who once ignored her in elevator rides. She read them all, responded to few, not out of arrogance, out of clarity. She hadn't destroyed anything. She had simply taken back what was hers. No applause followed. No standing ovation. But somewhere inside those hollowed-out executive floors, her name still echoed, and no one would ever forget it. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch flicking chaos alive. Your ex boss is shaking in their loafers.